Hi guys, welcome back. This video is going to be about my top 3 favorite baits to throw in my area of the country, the Northwest, in March. March specifically because there's a really big transition that happens toward the end of March into April where they really push harder for the bank. So a lot of these baits you can fish throughout that transition. You're not going to get as many bites as you would. Sometimes you got to go more finesse. So this video is mainly focused on March, and it's going to be my top 3 baits. I might have a 4th and a couple tips for you guys that are, can't really fish crankbaits that well. I understand that fishing at a pond and everything like that, throwing square bills and stuff, is a serious pain in the butt. So let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, you got to find the fish, right? You got to locate where the fish are and what they're doing. So the quickest and easiest way that I have found to do that is simply on the overcast, slightly windy days. You guys have seen me throw them 100 times, I swear. It's one of my favorite lures to throw. I could throw it all day. I could throw it in a mud puddle and I'm still so confident that I'm going to get bit. I love throwing them. My recommendation for you pond guys, try it out. Go with a bigger gold, and then a willow, doesn't really matter, double willow. A little Colorado is my favorite, a little silver Colorado. A bigger willow blade, 1/2 ounce. Even for you pond guys, you got to get it down low and you got to slow roll it this time of year. And try out some of the bluegill colors. You'd be surprised. Early season, some bluegill panfish type colors. And then of course if you're fishing in more shad type water or shiners and stuff like that, minnows, obviously your chartreuse and whites with your willows, and smaller blades if you need to stay up a little, or smaller blades if you need to get down just a little bit more, bigger blades if you've got bigger fish, bigger prey fish that is. And of course, I like to run a trailer. You can run a trailer hook if you think this is too much bait for the fish in your area. I don't think it is. You'd be surprised the size of smallmouth that have bitten this lure right here. So keep in mind and try things out. Don't get so close-minded and not throw certain things that look good or feel good. If it doesn't feel good for you to have that on the back of there, don't throw it. Just simply don't throw it with that back there. Alright, so starting off, spinnerbaits. Probably my favorite bait to throw in, especially the first couple weeks of March when the water starts to get around 50 degrees or really close to that. They really like a spinnerbait nice and slow, really low to the ground, almost tipping dead grass or bumping through the rocks or just kind of climbing up and through stuff. Around wood is obviously where a spinnerbait really excels. And if you're going to get into heavy cover, of course, try that swim bait on the back. You'd be surprised how much more weedless the bait is. My second favorite bait to throw this time of year, of course, is some kind of jig. Whatever jig you prefer, and whatever weights you think will work for you. A really great starting place is 3/8 and 1/2 ounce. 3/8 if you got kind of more of a muddy bottom that this bait will get stuck into. 1/2 ounce if you're in the rocks or any kind of current or in a river type situation, or you got to get down through the wood quickly. You need it to get to the bottom quickly because you're throwing around heavy cover. Structure jig, they're sold almost everywhere. I'm pretty confident this Strike King, it's made by Strike King. Structure jig is one of my favorites. It's not the greatest in rock, but it'll do it. The last video I was using actually this color jig right here, 1/2 ounce structure jig, brown and purple. Really, when you're dragging the bottom like I was, brown and purple is a great place to start. Any kind of green and purple, brown and purple, great place to start. Most people will tell you to start with green pumpkin, but purple, a lot of things in the water have a little purple tint to it, and it gives me confidence. So structure jigs is my other 2 favorite. Early season, in the spring, slow dragging it on the bottom just kind of lift it up. You'll feel it kind of lift up, especially half ounce. You'll feel it lift up and you let go and it'll just dunk on the bottom. You can really track your bait really well, especially you pond guys. Get on some jigs, and heavier jigs too, not just 1/4 ounce and 3/8 ounce jigs. Try some half ounce, 3/4 ounce jigs. Drag that through the mud. This is a little black and blue finesse jig that I'm holding on to. This is a mean pond little bait. It falls real slow. You can put a big chunk on it and almost throw it like a Senko. It's essentially a weighted Senko that's got more bulk to it. Definitely try that out in the springtime and March, particularly around that 50-degree water. Fish things a little slower than you normally would, but don't be afraid to couple hops here and there. I think that's it for jigs. So moving on. Now this is where things get a little weird. If you're in a boat, obviously it's not too difficult to throw these. But if you're on the bank, I'll give you an alternative. Obviously, you've heard it hundreds and hundreds of times. A flat-sided crank of whatever kind. Strike King makes some. These are some Storm Arashi flat 7s. Flat-sided crank works really well. Even some of your Spro rock crawlers. I mean, you can see that guy. It's just beat to heavens. Spro rock crawler is another great bait to throw early spring. Anything that gets down low, where you're ticking the bottom or just bumping into the bottom. So if you're fishing out of a boat and stuff, 1.5s of course are a go-to, and of course, you know, match your, basically colors on these don't matter to me quite as much because the bait's moving so quick. Stuff that just looks natural, base it on your watercolor. So if your water's dirty, a really dark bait or a really bright bait, and then if your water's, you know, 3 or a little over 2 foot of viz, or real right close to 2 foot of viz, depending on the fishery, of course, it's completely subjective. Throw a little more natural color baits, maybe some with some flash on them. Also a bonus bait, just because I see it laying here, especially you pond guys, a lipless crankbait of any kind. This is a Rattle Trap by Bill Lewis, Tennessee shad color. It's got that chrome side, orange belly. To me, it does not really, I mean, it's definitely a shad color, but that also looks like some kind of panfish color too, with some flash on there, orange. That's a golden bait in the ponds. And of course, you cannot go wrong. Blueback chrome, especially in the ponds. This is an amazing bait. You can get these in all the way, I think, to like 1/16 ounce if you're fishing in mud puddles. These are half ounce baits, 1/4 ounce baits. Try them out in your ponds and vary your retrieve. Do not sleep on these baits just casting and winding. Lift them up, drop them down, change water depth. This is one of the only baits that you can really manipulate from bottom to top. You can fish them close to the top, you can fish them on the bottom, you can fish them in between. So very versatile bait for you pond guys. That was just a little bonus bait just because I saw it lying there. If you can't fish a crankbait because you mainly fish ponds, here is your alternative. Now listen close, and I've got a really great video on most of these baits as well. Get a variety of color here. A chatterbait. These are, I just can't stress it enough. In March, in the Northwest, these have a place. They really do. Them bright sunny days, they can excel really well. Bird blue skies. You can keep it right in the middle of the water column. The jackhammer is one of my favorites because it's got a lower, if you watch Wired to Fish, they did a video of all the different types of chatterbaits underwater with audio. And the jackhammers have a tungsten head, and it's a little bit more of a gentle thump versus a really loud tick 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 tick. So if your fish, you feel like they're fairly active, you see them up sunning themselves, yo-yo a rattle trap, or grab just your generic original OCB chatterbait with the lead and yo-yo it up and down, up and down. On the more overcast days, if they're not on the spinnerbait, get out a jackhammer and throw that around, especially if they're a little more pressured, because there's a bunch of trout fishermen or anything like that. Both have their place. Really, really great alternative to cranking versus or cranking, and then you pond guys, obviously cranking and square billing and stuff like that would be rather difficult unless you've got docks or things in the water that you can throw at the bank and come to you. So your alternative would be to go get some chatterbaits. 3/8 is a little light, but you can get away with it if it's shallow enough. I really prefer the heavier ones because this blade likes to make the bait right up anyway. And obviously with trailers and things like that, really, I think one of the best trailers out there, and I've said it time and time again, the Yamamoto Seiko. It's designed for a chatterbait. It's really dense, strong plastic. You only have to get a couple packs in some generic greens and browns and some blacks and blues, and you couple packs and you've got chatterbait trailers for the next couple years probably. They really last, unless you are catching 100 fish a day. Then they probably won't, but that rarely happens around here. Now, what rods do you throw these baits on? If you have one rod, just tie the bait on and throw it. No big deal. I prefer to throw most of these baits on 15-pound line or heavier. The wired baits, and you can get away with it on a chatterbait, but on a spinnerbait, throw fluorocarbon. Do not throw straight braid. I know that 30-pound braid is becoming quite a popular thing. Invest in another rod or invest in a spool of line to get you 15-pound or 16-pound fluorocarbon. It'll make you happier with the spinnerbaits, and especially with crankbaits, you want to throw that with fluorocarbon so that you can get the max depth out of your bait. Straight braid on the jigs if you're around pretty heavy cover, 30, 40, 50 pound. I don't go much more than 50 pound. If I'm doing more than 50 pound, then I'm going to switch to a Texas rig. You really don't need that for a jig. And of course, chatterbaits, fluorocarbon is probably your best bet. It allows the most movement out of the bait, allows the most action. You can do it with straight braid. I don't recommend it, but if that's all you got, that's all you got. Go ahead and fish it. And then rods that I use, obviously these are placeholders if need be, but just based on the action, really. Good, solid 150 size or 200 size reel that for a jig you're going to want anywhere from 7.1 to 1 up to 8 to 1 gear ratio, just because when they bite it and you set up on them, they run, they're shocked, they don't know what hit them. So fast reel, a good solid stiff rod with a nice parabolic bend to keep them pinned with that big hook. I use, this is the Levante Extreme Mission Type F, so 7 foot 5 inch, 3/8 to 1 ounce lure weight, so essentially a medium heavy, and then 10 to 25 pound line. That's most of the line weights and stuff that are put on rods are based on monofilament, so and that's based on diameter of the line too. So a little tip there. If you look on your braid packaging, that usually tells you the braid's mono equivalent, so then you know that you're running the right line on the right rod so that you don't eat up your guides or anything like that. But just a generic good medium heavy with a good solid, I really suggest getting into $70 to $80 or $100 reels if you're on a budget. Those reels will last a lot longer. This is a Shimano Corrado K, and it's an older one. As you can tell, it's missing that plate on the thumb piece there. That's for my jig rod and my Texas rig rod. For doing any kind of cranking or chatterbait fishing, I like to use a little more of a limber rod, especially if I'm around rock, and especially of course on treble hook type baits. You want to use a softer, moderate tip rod to keep the fish pinned and fight them better. And then I've got a Tatula 200 on there. Nothing crazy. You don't need anything crazy. You can throw a crankbait on a medium heavy rod. You don't need a rod like this, but if you really want to dive into treble hook baits and getting another setup that can do this really well, I really highly suggest the Zodius. And I know that the Corrado rods are pretty good for a cheaper price. They have a moderate tip on them. This one is rated for a 1/4 to 3/4 of an ounce at 7 foot 2 inches. I prefer a little bit longer rod for my cranking applications, and really overall I just like a little bit longer rod. Gets you a couple more yards on the cast, and a little more tip out on the end to soak up the fight. I really enjoy this rod. So for cranking and stuff, to kind of sum that up, because I was a little all over the place, you want a rod that is good and limber on the end, a moderate action, a medium power moderate action rod, or a mod fast tip, or whatever most companies call it. That is a really good starting place. You'll keep fish pinned, you'll get them in the boat. Perfect. And then last but not least, once again, we've got a Generation 2 Extreme Mission Type F Mega Bass Levante. Essentially a medium heavy rod with a 200 size reel, 15 or 16 pound fluorocarbon for my spinner baits. And I throw everything from jerk baits, spinner baits, Texas rigs, jigs. This is an extremely versatile rod. So if you're looking for one rod to kind of do it all, and I know there's 100 videos on the internet about this, but really a medium heavy 1/4 or 3/8 to an ounce lure weight rating, 7 foot 2, 7 foot, 7 foot 5, 7 foot 6, whatever, you know, that the length of rod should really be based on how tall you are and how much rod you want to manipulate all day. That's a really great setup for all of these baits. You can throw all of these baits on one setup, and that would be a 7 foot medium heavy 1/4 to an ounce. You would be perfect with a fast tip. You could throw everything: chatterbait, spinnerbait, crankbaits, lipless, jig. You could throw it all. And 16 to 15 pound fluorocarbon, and you're fishing. And for you advanced guys that do fish a lot and don't fish ponds very often, and pond guys, if you're feeling frisky, try it out. I've never really done it because usually the water's a lot dirtier, and this is more of a clean water technique. My bonus lure is an A-rig. In the spring, early, especially river fishing, or the water's clean, and the water's either clean or has risen and has cleaned up, an A-rig, a 5-wire A-rig with 1/8 ounce heads, nothing special, 4-inch swim baits. In my state, I can't have more than 3 hooks, so I have 3 hooks across the bottom and 2 dummy rigs on the top with screw locks. Check out Tactical Bassin's video. They do a very great job, and that's where I learned how to set up my A-rigs. And I've got that again on a medium heavy. This is a 7 foot 6 with a 200 size rod with 20 pound fluorocarbon. Awesome setup for them days that them fish are just being a little funky, or they want a lot of lure in their face. So that's my top 4. I gave you guys a lot of suggestions on baits you can throw this time of year. I'm trying to keep this video as short as I can. So DM me on Instagram if you've got any more questions, or of course comment below if you've got any more questions I tried to cover as much as I could about pond type baits, because I know everyone doesn't have a boat, doesn't have the ability to get a boat. And the biggest thing I would like to stress there is that even though I'm on a boat and I film on a boat, I used to fish ponds all the time. My knowledge base and foundation is from pond fishing and bank fishing, so not much has changed. Just presentation changes on how you retrieve your baits in. So we got, to recap, we got chatterbaits to replace your crankbaits for you pond guys. Of course, cranking is just super effective during the early pre-spawn. If you can fish them, fish them. Spinnerbaits is probably my starting place. Every time I go out, I start tossing on a spinnerbait, especially if I'm throwing at wood, even rock. I like to throw a spinnerbait. And then of course, if all else fails, or I feel like there's fish there, you know, I'm marking fish, or I feel like there's fish there, or you pond guys, you want to learn where the end of the point is, where the grass line starts, tie yourself on a jig and start dragging it around. I think that covers it all. My first tip video of 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you learned something. Tight lines, everybody. See you in the next one.
Oh, no way, dude.
This is too much fun. Solid chunks, dude. I mean, oh, look at that freaking donkey, dude. Well, I wasn't filming, but decided